recognizing the undeniable strength and perseverance of our ancestors, because lots of times people want to keep us as Indigenous people as victims, and but don't recognize our strengths and successes. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that part. But I also, again, consistently said I was Two-Spirit. But I mean, being Two-Spirit doesn't make me a better or worse swimmer. I mean, I'm just a bad swimmer apparently. But it was just about being visible. Right. 20-year-old me never saw myself represented as a woman at that time.
Welcome to The Scaries, brought to you by Racer Co. I'm Sky.
And I'm Talitha. We are proudly broadcasting from Treaty 4 territory, and in each episode, we tackle the alarming, inconceivable, questionable, shocking, and scary statistics relating to, impacting, and intervening with the lives of women and girls worldwide.
You'll hear the scary truth, take away tools and tips, and learn about what you can do about it. And The Scaries is an opportunity to use our voices as women and supporters of women to make real change. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is just our opinion, so please take it with what you will. And remember that we are sharing some statistics that could be triggering to you, so listen with caution.
As straight, cisgender, white, able-bodied settler women, we are aware of the privilege that we have, and we want to use this platform to spread awareness about the scary reality that women from around the world face in different life situations.
Why?
Because sometimes nothing is scarier than being a woman. Hello, it is June, which means it's officially Pride Month and National Indigenous History Month. There is so much to celebrate and honor in one bright, shiny month, and I just absolutely love it.
Oh yes, the sun's out, the grass is green, or getting there in Saskatchewan where we are. Still got a sweater on. It's always a little chilly. You never know what it's going to be, but happy. It's the start of rebirth, new things.
Just feels good.
Everything starting fresh.
Feels good. I mean, in Saskatchewan, you never know. It snows one day and is sunny and bright the next. But when it comes to these national days and months of awareness and remembrance like we are in right now, we can't deny the fact that they do hold significance in our collective consciousness. They serve as reminders of pivotal moments and people. However, only chatting about these topics on specific days of the calendar really does limit their impact and does a disservice to them.
Yeah.
Just like any national day or month that exists, like International Women's Day on March 8th, or the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls and Two-Spirit People on May 5th, or Gender Equality Week in September. The issues we commemorate and the values that we honor should not be confined to a single day or month. They resonate throughout the year, shaping our society and guiding our actions.
And really, I think the bottom line is true commitment to change requires action. So let's stop just talking about it. When we celebrate, let's actually make something change or promise or commit to making an action. And so today and all year round, really, we're taking the time to celebrate and honor the contributions of the queer community and the Indigenous community. But we really want to encourage you to do the same, to do this all year round versus just in June or whatever the month may be that we're celebrating. Please do consider what you're talking about, the spaces you hold, and including those diverse voices and diverse topics in everything you do all year round.
Absolutely. And as always, we will have some actions for you at the end of the episode because that's what we like to do, give you some homework. So keep on listening until the end. The queer community in Canada is typically marked by the acronym 2SLGBTQIA+, or a variety of those identities kind of mixed together, but that's the one that we choose to use in our world. However, the 2S piece is not as widely known or even celebrated or identified as a community elsewhere. In fact, 2S or Two-Spirit is actually a relatively new term. The term itself is new. And we are excited to be celebrating that identity today. But what's better than the two of us celebrating?
Well, of course, we have to have a friend on. So we're super excited to be celebrating Pride Month and National Indigenous History Month with one of our absolute favorite humans and past Scaries guests, Lori Campbell. We're really looking forward, as always, to chatting with Lori about being Two-Spirit and the significance of the Two-Spirit identity in Indigenous and non-Indigenous spaces. And if you don't know what the term Two-Spirit is, well, hold on to your hats, because we're going to dive into the rich history that really is the Two-Spirit identity. But first, we want to note that it is important to remember that the following notions, ideas, identities should not be generalized to all Indigenous peoples and cultures. Right. There is a lot of diversity and differences in the traditions and understandings of the different nations of Indigenous cultures. So it's crucial to recognize that the concept of Two-Spirit folks is not universal to all Indigenous worldviews.
Right.
Also, when discussing the concept of Two-Spirit individuals, it's necessary to remember that this is not an identity that non-Indigenous people can adopt or claim. So you can only identify as Two-Spirit if you are, in fact, of Indigenous culture.
Absolutely.
So the concept of Two-Spirit folks existed well before the arrival of European settlers on Turtle Island. Two-Spirit is a translation of the Anishinaabe term. So I said that really slow, but I had to make sure I didn't get it wrong. And it refers to a person who embodies both masculine and feminine spirit. Some Indigenous people use the term to describe their sexual, gender, and or spiritual identity. But really, as an umbrella term, it may encompass same-sex attraction and a wide variety of gender variants. So it's not just about sexual orientation that a lot of the pieces of 2S LGBTQI plus are. This also talks about just gender expression.
And a spiritual aspect.
Exactly.
Of it. Yeah.
So including people who might be described, so 2S includes people who might be described in Western culture as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transsexual, transgender, genderqueer, or those who have multiple gender identities. So it really does encompass a lot of things.
Absolutely, yeah. So looking at kind of pre-colonialism, before the colonizers came and did what they did, various Indigenous cultures have their own versions of the term Two-Spirit, or I guess the concept of Two-Spirit, which historically were seen as gifted and honored in their community because they carried two spirits with them, both male and female. These traits include gender flexibility, specific work responsibilities, attraction to the same gender, and spiritual connections. Not necessarily all of them, but they can include those pieces. Sometimes the term Two-Spirit specifically addressed sexuality, as Skylar had said, although Two-Spirit individuals might not consider themselves homosexual. Colonialists viewed them through a lens of homosexuality, but historically, the relationships were seen as heteronormative. Additionally, Two-Spirit folks often held significant spiritual roles within their communities. They were the healers, the medicine people, the visionaries within their given community, and were foundational members of their culture. Much of this can be attributed to the double vision, quote unquote, Two-Spirit people were gifted with, being able to see both through the masculine and the feminine lens. But then along came the colonizers. The impacts of colonization on Two-Spirit individuals alongside all Indigenous communities on Turtle Island have been profound and detrimental. One significant consequence for Two-Spirit individuals in particular was the imposition of the highly heteronormative norms through the establishment of residential schools, disrupting Indigenous children's natural inclinations. This process led to the loss of Two-Spirit people's traditional way of life and cultural identity, with enduring repercussions that demand acknowledgement today. As colonization unfolded, the respect and esteem traditionally afforded to Two-Spirit individuals dwindled, relegating them to marginalized roles in society. The prevalence of homophobic attitudes further exasperated their marginalization.
So unfortunate. So now when we look at today's day and age, although the concept of Two-Spirit individuals has been around for a long time, the term was only proposed, the term Two-Spirit, in 1990. So we were born.
We were alive.
We were alive.
We were just babies, but we were alive.
At the third annual Intertribal Native American First Nations Gay and Lesbian American Conference in Winnipeg, Manitoba, activist Albert McLeod suggested using Two-Spirit to represent the Indigenous queer community. The conference attendees embraced the proposal, which quickly gained popularity among Indigenous groups. Only in recent years, though, has there been a growing recognition that the experiences of Two-Spirit people are distinct from those other members of the LGBTQIA+ community, particularly due to specific understandings of gender identity inherent in Indigenous peoples. Despite historical challenges, many Two-Spirit individuals have actively sought to reclaim their rightful place within their communities and cultural heritage. Their initiatives focused on education and healing. And through these endeavors, they are reasserting their inherent sacredness and restoring the sense of identity. Mm-hmm. And honestly, even in our research, it was hard to find a lot specific on Two-Spirit. There's a lot of LGBTQ plus stuff, but not necessarily things that include Two-Spirit, which is really sad.
Well, I think it speaks to the erasure of the Indigenous queer community specifically, like in those intersections that we rarely see in kind of research and statistics and all of that. Like it's only in 1990 where they really proclaimed as an identity
and recognized. Yeah. So today, the Two-Spirit identity serves as a broad term for the Indigenous queer community, as other labels within the acronym are European in origin. For modern Two-Spirit individuals, embracing this identity means reconnecting with ancestral traditions related to gender, sexuality, and spirituality, and societal roles, which is why raising awareness and chatting about all the beauty that exists in this community is essential in fighting against the darkness.
Which is where our guest comes in today. She brings with her a wealth of knowledge and personal insights into the joys, struggles, and triumphs of navigating the intersectionality of Indigenous identity and queer expression in Canada. Welcome back, Lori.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You will know Lori from the Scaries episode on Indigenous female leadership and the concept of matriarchy, and of course, her own notoriety in her own right. She's very famous. But if you don't, then listen up as Sky introduces this incredible guest of ours.
You bet. Okay, so a little bit about Lori. Lori Campbell is a Two-Spirit member of Montreal Lake Cree Nation, and she's dedicated her career to promoting social justice and equity in education. She's currently pursuing a PhD, which we chatted a little bit about before, in social justice education at the University of Toronto. And she focuses on Indigenous women's entrepreneurship in higher education. With over 16 years of experience in student services and administration, Lori has received numerous awards for her commitment to service and leadership, including the Women of Inspiration Indigenous Leader Award, the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal for Community Engagement, wowza, and the National Inspire Award for Leadership and Education. She is a firm believer in the power of storytelling and shares her lived experiences, traditional knowledge, and professional expertise to catalyze processes of indigenization, decolonization, and reconciliation within organizations and communities. Her impactful journey stands as a beacon for those committed to advancing social justice in education and beyond. And as you know, we're going to chat with Lori about being Two-Spirit today, but she is much more than how she identifies. But as a trusted advisor, mentor, and friend of ours, we asked her to join us for this special episode to really give a voice to the Two-Spirit identity and share her experiences. So welcome, welcome.
We're very excited for today. So as last time, you know that we do rapid fires, and this is going to be a good one. Here we go, Lori. First up. What do you do to find peace?
I think in particular, two things. One is ceremony, ceremony and being within my ceremonial lodges and community. And the other is just being outside is ceremony. I spend a lot of time, if you follow my Instagram, you see me outside hiking with my dog. And so it's just peaceful, right? Even this morning, just walking in, there was just a moment of just quiet and crispness in the air. And I just kind of paused on the sidewalk and it's just like, oh.
Feels nice.
Totally.
Yeah, it's rejuvenating for sure. Next up, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received? It's heavy.
It's a hard one. Yeah.
I think a lot of it is, like I have always said that, it's really about like knowing that not every day is going to be your best day. Like you're not always going to hit that personal best on every day, but, just to try to bring the best that you can on any given day. And I think about that in relation to myself, but I also think about it in relation to others, and try to be mindful that it's not all about me in relation to others. And, be mindful that this might be the best that that student or that colleague can bring today. I don't know what's going on in their life, but it's not for me to judge.
Yeah, I love that. I took a Brene Brown course, and it was that concept that like really clicked for me. That the question was, do you believe that people are doing the best that they can, like at any given moment? And just like reframing that of like, I think that you're doing the best that you possibly can in this moment. And if it's your 20% or if it's your 120%, that's good enough for what this is. So that's such a good way of like reframing things and
remembering there's more beyond the surface, right?
Yeah. And you're not the main character in everyone's story.
I'm not the center of the universe.
Yes.
I mean, you are in your life for sure. Okay. And last but not least, I know you shared this in the last episode, but what is your scary? And it's okay if it's changed. It's okay if you have more than one.
Yeah, I think I'll, last time I mentioned about 7 generations and not thinking that far ahead, but, just in present day, I mean, as a woman, as a queer woman, as an Indigenous woman, I think a lot of right now about what could be undone given the political climate and how that could impact. I'm not so much worried about me, in my 50s, it's like, I'll make it, I'll survive, been there, done that. But I worry about the young people. So the young queer youth and the impact that will have on them.
Yeah, it is scary.
Women, young women in particular too.
Yeah, it's very scary. Things that are happening in the world. Not nice. So we're going to move into, as we always call it, the nitty gritty of the questions today. And so we're going to be talking about being Two-Spirit and the Two-Spirit experience. And obviously you can only speak to your own experiences. So just as the listeners, just make sure that you are aware of that. She's not speaking for all Two-Spirit folks, but she does have a wealth of knowledge and a lot of experience in this realm. So my first question is, can you share the cultural significance of the Two-Spirit identity within Indigenous communities? And we shared like the history and kind of where it came from, but just from your own perspective, that cultural significance.
Yeah, I think about, Indigenous culture as most of our languages aren't like really gender binary. They're more role affiliated. And we spoke about this last day, like the role of aunties and how familial connections are made. And I think of Two-Spirit in that way as well. In the community, you have an elder, you have a knowledge keeper, you have a medicine person, you have the fire keeper, you have, the pipe carrier, you have a Two-Spirit person. And again, noting that term is new, but there were names and words for various things. I once heard from a Cree elder in Alberta that there were something like 6 to 8 different words to identify somebody who was Two-Spirit.
Wow.
And knowing that there were words like that affirms who we are and who we were and our acceptance within there. And one thing I think about a lot, because it was brought to my attention by a young Two-Spirit person as the gravesite recoveries from the residential schools were coming to light, and a young Two-Spirit person, I'd been speaking at a feast and said, to me, like, how come there's so few Two-Spirit elders? And I said, and we kind of like paused for a moment. And then, the youth asked me like, well, what do you think happened to them at the residential schools? And so I've always made a point ever since then of really thinking about that, because we all probably know that little person that we're like, I don't know if they fit within the gender binary. And when you think about historically, before going to residential schools, everybody just would have been running around being their amazing kids, little spirits. Yeah. And I think that they would have been easily identified in many instances. And given what we know about the harms that have occurred in residential schools, I think they would have been disproportionately targeted and probably disproportionately were not able to make it out of the residential schools. Right. And so I think that has led to where we are today. But I also think with the impacts of colonization, like there were so many different aspects to it. And one was language, right? Removing the language. And anybody who speaks a different language, you will hear them talk so much about like how you understand the culture, how they understand the world, their relationships to everything through the language. And when you lose the language, you lose that part. And so I think about, with English being forced upon us, that we also lost the ways in which to identify and understand ourselves and the world around us.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. It strips you from exactly who you are. And talking about those little spirits just running around. Like, I mean, obviously Skylar and I have young kids, and just seeing them as who they are and who they want to be. And they're just growing up exactly as they are and not being anything forced upon them. And it just putting it in that context of residential school, it just is so heartbreaking to think about that. Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about how there's been words and things have changed with the Two-Spirit identity. So can you talk a little bit about how the perception of Two-Spirit has changed over time from the past and history to now?
I think, like the rest of, the land currently known as Canada and people here, Indigenous peoples are not untouched by the impacts of colonialism. Mm-hmm. And along with that, aspects of Christianity that taught things like, significant gender difference between males and females and roles specifically. We've seen documentation, historical documentation from colonizers and usually religious folks who came along and documented things,
right.
That talked about how, the men were subordinate to the women. And there's actually in the Jesuits wrote, to my Auntie Maria had read this and researched it. They had actually wrote out steps on how to teach the men, Indigenous men, to overpower and subordinate their women. And then that involved physical harm steps, right?
Oh man.
Oh my God.
And so, there's one thing that's, there's really good documentation. So we know all of these things to be true. And so in Indigenous community, depending on the impact of Christianity in particular, it's been difficult to understand and to remember. And a couple things that I found most difficult. One is the term Two-Spirit itself. For those old ones, and in my community, because I've talked to my old aunties and stuff, and like my great aunties, I guess, so the old aunties, and they, when they think of Two-Spirit, they often don't like that term because they know that we have one spirit within us. Mm-hmm. And some people assume that the Two-Spirit means like, well, there's two separate beings sort of within you. And so it's very confusing for them. And I tried to explain that that's not actually the case. It just really more refers to having, male and female energy, to think about the binary or whatever. So that's confusing. And that, and also Christianity sort of affects that idea.
For sure. Yeah.
And then the other is just that just to be blunt, oftentimes when people say that they're Two-Spirit, our colonial minds have been taught to think about what's going on behind closed doors.
Right.
When we hear about queer and stuff. And that's not what people should be thinking of. Mm-hmm. That's like my auntie would say, you're thinking with your white mind.
Yeah.
When you hear somebody say that they're Two-Spirit, you should be thinking about what their role is in the community and what gifts they're bringing. Mm-hmm. And often in what I see in the Two-Spirit people that I know, those older than me, those younger than me, is this like, they're great mediators. They're great at the in-between spaces. They're great at navigating conversations between the binary, between men and women, between adults and children, between non-Indigenous and Indigenous. This just naturally seems to be where many of our gifts lie.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. I think also, we obviously are like, women bring so much to the table, but thinking in that way, that kind of Indigenous lens is like women bring, that's what we're speaking about, is that women bring very specific gifts to the table. And, and as do men. And so now as do Two-Spirit folks, it's just where it's not that, what's going on behind closed doors or what you do in your own time. So there's obviously you talk about like colonialism and the impacts of that on Indigenous people as it is. Can you talk about navigating the intersectionalities of being Indigenous and being Two-Spirit, where being Indigenous is sometimes hard to navigate in this society and being Two-Spirit is sometimes hard to navigate when people don't understand?
Yeah. And, again, I feel like a lot has changed for me in the last 3-4 years as I, approached 50, went over 50, in just my perspective and how I walk forward, I guess, in the world and what I feel like my responsibilities are, but also the power that I have in a different way. And I take that responsibility very, seriously. And so, for example, just like on my Zoom, it says, she, her, Two-Spirit. And whether people know what it is or not, they will see it. I want it to be part of common understanding, represented, not erased. And I know that has impact. I don't let my introduction go by without acknowledging that part of me, because like you mentioned at the beginning, like, it doesn't define me, but it does tell you about the lens through which I experience the world, right? Yeah. And so I speak to it. I can't pretend that I'm not that and tell you about, just being Indigenous. It doesn't work that way, right? Like, you can't separate that out from, how you experience the world. And so sometimes it's frustrating in the times of the DEI, EDI lens, where people, want to have some diversity at the table. And so they'll invite me, and, and sometimes I'll be real specific, like which diversity, category are you expecting me to fill? Because it can be that, at a table that I'm expected to fulfill, Indigenous, woman, and queer. And whereas, if you got a room full of 6 people, why would you not have an Indigenous person, a queer person, and a woman?
Yeah.
And so it can be used just to further agendas that aren't our own at times. And so I try to make people conscious of that. And also, like you said, like, it is an intersection. I only know me. I know lots of other Two-Spirit people. Like the two of you, I mean, there's lots of difference, right? And like the diversity across, cis het men, there's lots of diversity, and same within Two-Spirit community. And of course, we come from multiple nations too, and Cree, and I've lived in Haudenosaunee territory, very different. I was just in Blackfoot territory. Oh my goodness. Like, I couldn't pick out any words, and I realized how unfamiliar I was with Blackfoot language. And so I, encourage people to not take, what I'm sharing today as, like you said, the be all to end all. This is, my experience. I will say, just while I'm thinking of it too, is, you'll hear me say I'm a indigiqueer, Two-Spirit person. When I'm saying indigiqueer, it's just identifying as queer in a mainstream way and letting you know I'm Indigenous. And it's fun. It's fun to say indigiqueer. But a person who's not Indigenous, but who is queer, should not be using that term.
Right.
And Two-Spirit as well, given its origins, it was a term developed in modern day to reclaim lost identity for Indigenous peoples. It is a term that should only be used by Indigenous peoples, but not all queer Indigenous people call themselves Two-Spirit either. And so, like everything else, I just always encourage people, if you're not sure what pronouns to use, if you're not sure how to address people, just ask. And people are usually more than happy to say, like, yes, I'm Two-Spirit, or, I'm queer, I'm, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that just respect piece. I think if you're coming at it from a place of love and respect, then people will more than often be open to chatting with you about it.
For sure. So in your experience, how do Indigenous communities create and maintain Two-Spirit spaces? And what role do these spaces play in fostering acceptance?
Yeah, so I do work in that particular area. And for example, when I just recently did a keynote, and I make a point in the conversation when I'm talking about Two-Spirit to recognize that I'm often speaking to mixed groups, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, many other backgrounds. And I do make a specific note to the Indigenous folks in the room, and will say to the Indigenous, my Indigenous relatives in the room who are still learning about Two-Spirit and where Two-Spirit people fit within our community, please, I invite you to continue your learning. But while you're doing that, make sure that you're opening the space so that Two-Spirit people can be within the circle.
Right.
And then I also address the Two-Spirit people in the room, even though I don't necessarily know if there are any or who they are. And I will say something like, and to the Two-Spirit people within the room, know that you're seen, that you're loved, that you're cared for, and that you belong in the circle. And, I am grateful that you're here. And so I say that in one way, I guess it kind of models to others in the room who might not know, but I can tell you that after the keynote that I just did, I had probably more queer and two-spirit young people, students from that university, come up to me after than I've ever had at an event. And the event was just on women's leadership.
Right.
But I made sure to, bring all of me into that room. And sometimes it's scary. Like, it's still scary for me sometimes. I don't know all the rooms.
Right.
And I don't know what people are bringing to the table and what their experiences are. But then again, I remind myself, you know what? I'm over 50. I'm an associate vice president. I got a great support system, and I need to do this because I can. This is my sort of where I have power and privilege now to get a message across. And if I get some hate back on that, which sometimes I do, it's all right. Like, I'd rather the hate now. 20-year-old me, struggled with that hate.
Right.
And I think about, I don't, if I can take that hate so a 20-year-old or a 15-year-old doesn't have to right now, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah. Take the brunt of it and protect people, and also then create safe spaces and know that they have allies and safety. So you talked about having, obviously, the Indigenous folks that you speak to in the room, opening space for two-spirit people to be in different circles and that sort of thing. And I know last summer, you and I and my mom went for lunch, and you chatted to us a bit about the Two-Spirit Sundance ceremony that you attended. And I'm not asking you to divulge any of the specifics that happened there, because we want to respect the sacred nature of that ceremony. But could you speak to just the importance of those types of ceremonies in reclaiming and celebrating Two-Spirit identities within the Indigenous community?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do belong to a Two-Spirit Lodge. It's in Manitoba with a couple of Two-Spirit elders that we work with. And we do lots of different ceremonies there, fasting, Sundance, sweat lodges, moon ceremonies, all of those types of things. And I think probably what was interesting about it, I mean, it was beautiful. It was just beautiful for to be there. I was one of the, if not the oldest dancer in the Sundance, and everybody else was a lot younger than me. And some of them, many of them, including myself, had, attempted or tried to walk into other mainstream Indigenous spaces and ceremonies as our unapologetic selves and however we present, and had really terrible experiences, including our Sundance chiefs, who, had Sundance, our trailblazers had done the Sundances in many of those spaces. And my understanding is generally in Sundance ceremony, it's very binary generally. So, men would be in one spot and women in another. And that causes some challenges for Two-Spirit people because, because I say I'm a Two-Spirit woman and I use she, her pronouns. It doesn't necessarily mean that like I'm consistently in the same energy.
Yeah.
And so, and same for anybody else. Right. So, so we need to be able to bring our spirits into that space and be where we need to be.
Right.
And that's one thing that we can do within our own space. And I heard a lot of just really difficult stories from young people who are Two-Spirit and who were forced to, be in space in ceremony where people weren't happy that they were there. And like, imagine being your most vulnerable self, meditating, praying, however whatever your culture has it as, and having like people like knowing that there's people there that just hate you for who you are, or gunning you off, or and how difficult that is, and especially when you're young. And so our space, it was just beautiful. Everybody was just who they were. And there was lots of love. And at something like the Sundance, there's lots of other, community support that can be there as well. Who, likely aren't Two-Spirit. Some are, some aren't. And, our family friends were there as well and giving us strength. And it was really interesting at the end of the ceremony as it was noted by a person who described himself as a cis-het male, Indigenous man, who acknowledged they've been at many sundances and just how beautiful it was, but also acknowledged and called out his peers, saying, as beautiful as this is like, we have created this, like, everybody is here, all the two spirits are here from many nations, because they can't be themselves at ceremonies within their own nations. And so, he called out his peers to say, like, we need to fix that. And while at Sundance on the third night, I had this dream, and I told the elders, I said, I had this dream that pretty soon, like, that circle is it's going to start to be realized and recognized across Turtle Island, that the circle is not complete. Oftentimes, you hear, we need a male elder, we need a female elder, and people will be saying, wait, we can't go ahead with this ceremony because we don't have the two spirit within the circle. And so I had this dream, and I was telling, saying that and telling the youth, and this is what we're preparing them for. So yeah, it's just a really beautiful space.
That's super powerful.
Just an intentional role and being recognized as that role.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, the fact that there's been some tough stories that you've heard and you've experienced yourself of not fitting in and being hated just for who you are. So is there any other challenges that you can speak to being Two-Spirit, or that you're noticing in your community?
I want to acknowledge that there has been change. I recall walking in to an event, probably as a 25-year-old me, and getting abolished, essentially, like, you can't be here like that, you need to go. And, because I wasn't dressed in the way that they felt I should be dressed. And it wasn't because I was wearing anything offensive. It just was because I wasn't wearing a skirt. I was wearing very respectful other clothing. And I know that the very person that did that is completely in a different space now, and is very kind and loving to many Two-Spirit youth now. And so I want to acknowledge that, there are people that have, tried to decolonize and learn and understand differently. And I know many like that. And so I appreciate that. And I guess, again, I would just say to those, listeners who might be Two-Spirit, or somebody who is Two-Spirit, please let them know that, that we have a Two-Spirit community, we have a Two-Spirit ceremonial lodge, and there's, people out here that they can connect with and help them connect if they need or want.
We will share all of Lori's social handles and ways to get in contact with her too. So if that's something that you feel comfortable doing, or you would need to reach out to her, I'm sure she would be happy to hear from you. But as someone who is vocal about Two-Spirit issues, and I don't want to say issues, but just things that are happening in the community, what advice, and this is not your job, however, I will say, but what is your advice to offer to individuals and organizations who would like to be better allies and advocates for the Two-Spirit community?
One of the things that's happened is just erasure. Right. And so, not putting the 2S on, the big, I admit, back in the day, it was, the LGB. I think, and so terminology has, and there's reasons why it's challenging, to learn the 2S LGBTQ IA plus, phrase, but it's important because so much of what happened is just erasure.
Right.
And so even if you don't know Two-Spirit, but you're with an organization and, your wording is like, missing the 2S on it. You don't need to know fully what 2S is, but you need to know that it needs to be there. And so, you can bring it to people's attention. I think people need to think about to ensure you can't just identify Indigenous people by it's not a skin color. Right? And so, for students in the room, if you're working at the schools or whatever, like, it's important. It might be the first time a young person, Indigenous person, hears the term Two-Spirit, but it also might be the first time that a non-Indigenous person hears the term Two-Spirit. And, hopefully their curiosity will, like spark, some questions about, well, what is that? And again, if you don't have to know, not everybody needs to know that, but don't erase us.
Yeah.
Don't make us to non-existence, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's, that's always the first start is any of this work. I just always tell people is knowing that, that there's a concern or something missing is the first step. You don't necessarily need to know like how to address it. Like even if somebody, makes, says something that's like super homophobic, a person might not know how to address it, but you can say, hold on now, I'm not okay with that comment. This isn't the place for that.
Yeah.
Even if you don't have the language to say, well, actually that's homophobic because, that first disruption in our thought pattern, I think is the first step to that learning. And then when you come to things, and events, like just, be curious and be open and be accepting. We're really good at like trying to categorize.
Right.
And, that's like the world is always trying to make us do that. And, so I think that's part of like decolonization is just not trying to like not do that.
Right.
Like see people for who they are and what gifts they bring. And I think that in so many ways, back to my scary, I think if more of us could do that on a consistent basis, I think we'd be in a lot better place.
Create safe spaces and ask questions and be curious and come from a place of love.
Right. And just stop trying to put people in a box. Just let them be who they want to be and see them for their positives and their gifts rather than where you think they should fit.
Exactly.
In your circle. So if we look at the future and kind of what's happening right now in media and popular culture, what improvements, if any, or changes would you like to see in how Two-Spirit people are identified or portrayed?
Again, help make us visible. Don't try to categorize us as a monolith across the Two-Spirit board, because again, that's just not the case. And we come from many different backgrounds, cultural backgrounds. So, be open to that and don't shy away from us. Like, don't be, we bring our two-spiritedness when we walk in the room, but we bring,
so much more.
Everything, you bring more than being moms into the room, or wives. Like you bring, your education, your skill set, what your experiences have been, and that will evolve as our time goes on. And the other thing I would say is, because if I'm in a room and people know me, I'm probably not going to get necessarily the negative comment. But when I leave the room, maybe you will. Maybe somebody will say to you after, like, well, I don't know, like, what that's so special about it or whatever.
Right.
It's when I'm not in the room and when others like me aren't in the room that you will hear things. And that's when it's like, now your job, we've had this conversation. Again, you don't need to like be able to repeat everything that I've said, but you need to disrupt what is occurring in that moment. And be okay with being uncomfortable. I mean, sometimes it happens at Christmas dinner.
And definitely.
You don't need to, split up families over it or anything, but you can, certain comments aren't welcome in the house at, over holidays. They always say stay away from politics and whatever family holidays. And Matthew always says, you have to love your family, but you don't necessarily need to like them.
Exactly.
But you do need to take responsibility in ensuring, respectful space. And you don't know, there's lots of little ones running around in your family. You don't know where, where they're going to end up, or who they're going to bring home from school, or how they're going to respond, what they're overhearing while they're playing. And then they see a kid at school and repeat something that they heard at their Christmas dinner.
Exactly. And it's the actions, and they're, especially for little ones, they're little sponges, and they watch and see and hear everything that you do and repeat it. And so if you're going to stand by and let folks be discriminated against or bullied or harassed or whatever, they're going to be like, oh, okay, well, that's fine then. We don't like those people, or they're not equitable to us, or like, you know, and you create those divides, which is horrendous. I actually saw I watch a lot of reality television, particularly Drag Race. I love Drag Race very, very much. And so Canada's Drag Race had a couple seasons with Two-Spirit folks. And it was one of the first times, with exception of obviously Lori being on the challenge, but where I actually saw Two-Spirit people not even portrayed as a character, but just as themselves in television. And it was like, they just got to be exactly who they wanted to be. That didn't define who they were or anything, but it was really, really beautiful to see that it was the spectrum of people living in this country being represented in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's like, you know, even the show I was on, that was like, I just like loved that. When I had opportunity to make comments, I, you know, made sure that essentially what I talked about was, you know, recognizing the undeniable strength and perseverance of our ancestors, because lots of times people want to keep us as Indigenous people as victims, and but don't recognize our strengths and successes. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that part. But I also, again, you know, consistently said I was Two-Spirit. But I mean, you know, being Two-Spirit doesn't make me a better or worse swimmer. I mean, I'm just a bad swimmer apparently. But you know, but it was just about being visible. You know, like 20-year-old me never saw myself represented as a woman at that time in sport or and certainly not like a Two-Spirit person. So yeah.
It's absolutely beautiful. I love it.
Yeah.
So sort of as we wrap up this wonderful conversation that we've had, I'm wondering what message you would like to leave our listeners with regarding the importance of honoring and respecting Two-Spirit identities within Indigenous communities, but also beyond.
I think, again, just know that we're here, know that we're diverse amongst ourselves. And so don't make assumptions about, what we're bringing, and know that sometimes I feel like Two-Spirit for Indigenous people and for young people, like there's a coming into Two-Spirit as they find their cultural connection. And so, you know, just to be mindful of that, but know that we exist. Acknowledge us even when we're not in the room is what I would say.
That's a beautiful mic drop.
Recognize. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Is there anything else you want to say, Sharon?
Again, just, thank you for, having this conversation. I know lots of people often have questions, and I try to share a little bit every time I'm doing a larger talk, but, I don't always have opportunity to share so much in depth about it. So thank you for providing that space.
Thank you. Thank you for
sharing.
Yeah, answering our questions and being open to talking about your Two-Spirit identity and what that means for the rest of the world. Yeah. I always feel so privileged after we chat with Lori.
Me too. She's such a wealth of wisdom and comes about it in such an empathetic, genuine, authentic way. I always feel awkward asking these questions. I feel like we should know this.
Right.
It's our job to do this work, not ask certain communities to educate us. But she's always so welcoming of the questions.
Absolutely.
And gentle and open and not coming from a place of being upset that we're asking, wants to genuinely help others learn.
Yeah, I love that. She's just always so welcoming, and it's wonderful. But I guess what can we do now?
Yeah. So what can we do? As always, we always want to chat about what's the action that we can take as a result of this knowledge that we've shared. So there's a couple tips through our research that we want to share with you to practice allyship of Two-Spirit individuals. There's a number of things, so get your notepad handy. But first is reflect on the stereotypes and assumptions you hold on 2S, LGBTQIA plus, and Indigenous peoples. There's a lot of pieces in that long acronym.
Yeah.
But reflect on what are the assumptions you hold. I don't think there's not a lot of literature out there that digs into the differences between each one of those things. So think about that.
And like the intersectionality that Lori spoke about.
Because you can really be all of them if you're a Two-Spirit individual. So it's very interesting. Know how to intervene when racism, homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia happen. So again, like she says, at those Christmas dinners, it's your job to speak up. You have to say something, educate in a respectful way.
Yeah.
But don't Don't remain silent, because then we're just perpetuating this problem for 7 more generations.
Exactly.
Respect and support the choice of two-spirit trans people in using their pronouns of their choice. So again, Lori is two-spirit. She's also she, her. She's also identifies as a woman, but a two-spirit woman. So there's so many pieces. Do not lay claim to two-spirit identity if you're not Indigenous. We've talked about that. Learn about the activities and accomplishments of 2S LGBTQIA plus people and their communities. Look for ways to connect and offer support, whether it's attending a pride parade or volunteering to support organizations that support them. There's so many ways that you can really support.
I would just like, in addition to that, what Lori spoke about is if you have space at your, quote unquote table to have someone who's Indigenous and who's a woman and who's two-spirit, have 3 different people and not tokenize people to like that one kind of identity to speak on all 3 pieces.
Yeah. Acknowledge your privilege. So many of us have so much privilege, especially us, which is why we're doing this. We're creating a platform where we can bring in those who are not as privileged to share their voices, to amplify their messages and stories.
Absolutely.
So make sure you're trying to do the same. That's a big part of allyship, not taking the stage, but letting others take the stage. Listen more than you speak. God. This creates an opportunity to learn and think and really understand different perspectives, and really be cognizant of the space that you're taking up in meetings and conferences and gatherings. If the conversation is on two-spirit experiences, it should be two-spirit people who get the most space to discuss and share on that topic. So please be mindful of that. Be comfortable with being uncomfortable. I know it's not fun. It's probably the least fun thing, but all growth, there's growing pains, right?
Always.
So remember that it's going to be uncomfortable, but change is uncomfortable, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So be open to being uncomfortable and take opportunities for learning again. Thank you for listening to the podcast, because that in itself, I'm hopeful that you learned a lot. We learned a ton.
Yeah.
So read the literature, take the workshops, watch the documentaries, follow Lori on her socials.
We will share.
She's got a wealth of knowledge and is connected to many other individuals who are also a wealth of knowledge as well. So please do take the time to learn.
With that, thank you so much for joining us today as we confronted the terrifying but real statistics, stories that impact women and girls across the world. Please share this episode, rate and subscribe wherever you are listening. That very much so helps us. And stay tuned for more ways to make a positive impact. Together, we can make the world a little less scary for women and girls.
And be sure to follow us on Instagram at RacerCo and at scaries.podcast and on TikTok at RacerCo. Remember that change starts with awareness and action, which is what we're doing here today. So thank you for being part of the Scaries community and making the world a little less scary to be a woman. Bye.
Bye.